Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Way Forward Workshop Leader Lunch Break. We are thrilled to welcome Lee Fisher to the conversation. Wikipedia will tell you that Lee Fisher is an American attorney, politician, and academic, but to all of us, he is the ultimate public servant. His current role as Dean of the Cleveland Marshall College of Law and professor with the Joseph C. Hostetler Baker Hostetler Chair in Law is the perfect capstone to a lifetime, not just a career, serving the people of Ohio. As Ohio Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, Director of the Department of Development, Chair of the Third Frontier Commission, and State Senator and State Rep at the age of 29, he has given a lifetime of public servant. In addition to holding public office, he led the Centers for Families and Children and expanded their reach to provide additional support to create life-changing solutions for people throughout Northeast Ohio. When he took the helm of CEOs for Cities, a national organization, he brought his vision of building vibrant urban communities to life on the national stage and always made sure to showcase Cleveland's successes in the process. It is appropriate for our conversation today to note that Lee has emphasized leadership in the law at Cleveland Marshall and established a program on leadership in law. He teaches leadership, and of course, he always models it. His service at Cleveland Marshall will serve us for years to come as he inspires leaders of the future to follow in his footsteps. He is, of course, married to Peggy Zone Fisher, so together they are a dynamic duo of service for Northeast Ohio. And I must say, he owns the best Twitter picture you may ever find. He's a proud alum of Leadership Cleveland 1984. Lee, welcome.
Mary Ann, thank you very much. And I want to begin with a shout out to Leadership Cleveland. I had the privilege of being in one of the early classes back in 1984, before some of the people who are watching today were born. And my wife was also in one of the first classes. Mary Ann mentioned Peggy Zone Fisher. I asked Peggy to tune in because you never know whether anybody else is going to. So I figured at least I'd have Rachel, Mary Ann, Michael Bennett, and Peggy, and at least I'd have those four people watching. I also want to say a special thank you to Mary Ann. When I was president and CEO of CEOs for Cities, Mary Ann came to most of our national conferences, and that meant a lot to me. She was a very active member of CEOs for Cities and has taken that to a whole new level as the president and CEO of Leadership Cleveland by focusing a great deal on economic development. And I want to thank Rachel and Michael, who I've worked with and known for many years as well, for allowing me to speak today. As Mary Ann said, what I want to talk about today is leadership. All of us are leaders. I don't believe I'm any better leader than any of you, but I've been doing it a long time, and I've been doing it in four different sectors: in the public sector, in the private sector, in the nonprofit sector, and now in the academic sector. And it's given me the benefit of a perspective that, frankly, most people just don't get. I've been lucky to have full careers in all four sectors. And so that's why I want to share today. I think that all of us are put on this earth to make a dent in the universe and to repair our own patch of the world, so to speak. And so I think all of us have a mission, even if we don't always know we have that mission. And that is, in our own little way, to change the world. And that's what's driven me every day. I always, what I want to do today is share a couple stories of my career over the last 40 years and take 5 or 6 stories and put them into maybe 4 or 5 leadership lessons. And my first leadership lesson is start with why. In our day-to-day lives, no matter what's going on, we've got lots of things that we're dealing with every day that distract us from wanting to change the world. And so when those moments happen, it's helpful to close your eyes, take a few deep breaths and say, why do I get up every morning? Why do I do what I do? Easier said than done. But I believe that, for example, if every one of our law students in the middle of the stress of every day that they have here asked that question, They'll be able to see the forest and not the trees. One of my favorite stories, and some of you I'm sure have heard it, are two men who are putting big rocks on top of each other. One man is in pain. He's angry. He can't believe that every day in the heat of the summer, he has to put one big rock on top of the other. The other man, doing the exact same thing, however, although he's sweating, is in a good mood. He's feeling happy. And it seems that somehow those rocks aren't quite as heavy for him. A little boy goes up to the first man and says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I hate my job. All I do day in and day out, from early in the morning until the evening, is to put one big rock on top of the other. That's all I do." The little boy goes to the other man, who seems to be handling the situation a whole lot better, and says, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Son, I'm building a cathedral." It's how you look at things in life that makes the difference. And I actually believe that if each of us build our own cathedral, can see the end in mind, and seeing what we're doing every day leads to something much bigger than ourselves, that's what I mean by starting with why. Now, this is a picture of Mike Zone and Mary Zone, Peggy's parents, who were forces of nature, if you knew who they were. Together, they served in the Cleveland City Council, Mike first for 14 years, and then Mary for 7 years. And then later, their son, my brother-in-law and Peggy's brother, Matt Zone, served for another 20 years. So they're sort of legends on the West Side. And if you go down the Shoreway, you'll probably see the Michael J. Zone Recreation Center. Well, that's Mike Zone. This was a picture taken in September of 1944. Literally, Mike has his uniform on. Why? Because a couple days after they were married, he went off to fight for the United States of America in World War II. And 90 days later, he was captured as a prisoner of war in the Battle of the Bulge. Mary thought she'd never see her husband again. We often wondered how Mike Zone survived when younger men and stronger men and smarter men did not. But it wasn't until one day when Peggy and I said to Mary, after Mike had died of a sudden heart attack in 1974, "We want to write a book about your lives." And Mary pulled out of the closet something she had never shown Peggy or her other 8 brothers and sisters, 9 children. This was the diary that Mike Zone kept as a prisoner of war. It's the most extraordinary book I've ever written. I've ever read. And Matt Zone still has it in a safe today, and you still can read it quite legibly. And there are 2 things that jump out of the pages from this diary. First were the stories of the 9 children that Mike Zone and Mary Zone would have. Now, remember, as a prisoner of war, they had no children, but he named each child, and to a T, years later, those 9 children were born, one of whom, of course, would be my wife. The other thing that jumped out from the pages were that Mike Zone was an Italian who loved to eat pasta, but had no idea how to cook it. He was not a chef. But all throughout this diary are intricate pasta recipes, so intricate that Mary Zone, after he was liberated and came back to America, actually used those recipes. But guess what? Mike didn't understand the very recipes that he had written. He couldn't cook them. But while he was a prisoner of war, he could taste his future. He could see beyond the barbed wire. He could see beyond the cruelty of the guards. He could see something that the other men could not. It was his future. I've come to believe that the greatest gift that you can give any human being is the ability to see your future. This is the picture of James Stockdale. He was the longest serving prisoner in the Vietnam War. He was in what was called the Hanoi Hilton. Admiral James Stockdale has told stories about how he survived. It now is known as the Stockdale paradox. He said that there were a group of men who didn't survive because they were always optimistic that they would be freed any day and that the Americans would come tomorrow or next day or next week and free them. But the Americans didn't. There were another group of men who also did not survive. And these were the pessimists. These are the ones who said, America has forgotten us. We'll never, ever be freed. We will die in this prison. And then there were a third group of men led by Admiral James Stockdale. They survived. They understood that they weren't going to be freed tomorrow or next week, maybe even not next year. But they had an unbreakable faith that they would someday be freed. They understood that it wasn't going to happen today or tomorrow. They were what we would call realistic optimists. They understood that things would get better. All of us in our lives, even at this very moment, are having problems, every single one of us, including me. And sometimes those problems can overwhelm you. But if you can begin to see your future and realize that while things may not get better tomorrow or next week, they will get better. And that can literally drive you to success. And so I say, never lose faith in the end of your story. When I served as Attorney General of the state of Ohio, I traveled to all of Ohio's prisons, and I met young men and women who had no faith in their future. They had no sense of their future. They couldn't see their future. Why? Because they came from neighborhoods that were actually more painful than the prisons in which they were now sitting. They came from neighborhoods where literally survival was day to day. They didn't think about going to high school, certainly not to college, and of course, not to law school or having a career. They just wanted to survive the streets. And so when I became the CEO of the Center for Families and Children, I began to realize that the greatest gift you can give anybody, whether it's a human being or even a city, or for that matter, a nation, it's the ability to see your own future. And if you do that, as Wayne Dyer once said, if you change the way you look at things, the things that you look at actually do change. So I say to our law students on orientation day, which will be coming up on August 15th, I say the following: you have chosen to study and to work like most people won't, so you can change the world like most people can't. Our students deal with something that is far difficult than any difficult college. Law school is arguably the most difficult graduate school you can go to. It's grinding, it's stressful. And I want them to always understand that there's something bigger beyond, that they're learning a set of skills that can actually change the world in their own ways. The second story I want to tell you is the second leadership lesson. And that is the importance to have a sense of urgency and purpose. All of us want to live long, long lives. I certainly do. All of you do too. And thanks to modern medicine, there's a good chance that all of us will. But we also know that tragedies occur. And sometimes out of the blue, something happens and we didn't see it coming. That's why I believe having a sense of urgency in your life, no matter what your age, is important. And also having a sense of purpose. That came home to me when I was a student at Oberlin College. I still remember the day. It was May 4th, 1970. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm walking on the campus and I'm seeing a lot of my classmates crying, huddled around radios, huddled around black and white television sets. And I didn't really understand what was happening, but I knew it was something that was profound. What we found out was that literally just miles away at Kent State University, 4 students my age had been killed by the National Guard. And let's make it clear, not all those 4 students were actually protesting the Cambodia Award that day. One of them, Bill Schroeder, actually was in the ROTC. He was shot in the back by the National Guard. That moment when I learned that had a profound effect on me. And for those of us who lived through that time, this is a picture that we'll actually never forget. This was a picture on the cover of Life magazine. As innocent college students, my age, were dying, all of a sudden I realized that life is short. I never knew any of the students who died, but I've never, ever forgotten their names. Allison Krauss, Jeffrey Miller, Sandra Scheuer, and William Schroeder. It's not an exaggeration to say that that was the day I decided to go to law school. And it was the day I decided I wanted to have a public career and to try my hand at public service, so that tragedies like this did not happen again. And what's inspired me over the years is that phrase that Dr. King said, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I believe that. In fact, I believe it perhaps more today than I even did on May 4th, 1970. And so for me, doing what I've done is not about making a living. In fact, Peggy reminds me that if I had just stayed a lawyer, we would have had a better living. But for me, it was about making a difference. And I hope that all of us in our own way believe that that is how you change the world. I show you this picture from Charlottesville because all of us draw a line in the sand somewhere, something we will not tolerate, something we cannot stand for. And for me, it's always been hate. The fact that there are some people who hate other people because of the color of their skin or because of their religion, or even their political beliefs. And I made a decision early in my career that that's where I was going to draw my line in the sand, that that was going to be my purpose. And so one day when I was a state senator, it was in the mid-1980s, there were a series of cross burnings on the front lawns of some families in the Collinwood area of Cleveland, part of the area that I represented in the state Senate. I was angry. So I did what a lot of politicians do. I wrote a press release and I said, this is racism at its worst. This is absolutely awful. We should all decry it. And then I went on with my business. And I felt empty. I thought to myself, what did I just do? I did a press release. Now I can check the box, right? And I thought to myself, I really didn't do anything. I just made myself feel better. So I called another state senator whose district adjoined mine. We actually shared Collinwood. One half of Collinwood was my Senate district. The other part was his. His name was Mike White. He later served as the mayor of the city of Cleveland, but at that time he was a state senator with me. And I said, Mike, why don't we write a law that says that if you commit a crime against someone because of the color of their skin or their religion or their ethnic background or origin, that it's not just a crime against that person. It's not just a crime against that family. It's not just a crime against that neighborhood. It's a crime against society, and it deserves stiffer punishment. And so Mike and I that day in the mid-1980s wrote Ohio's hate crime law, one of the first hate crime laws in the nation. Today, every state has one. And now, as you know, there is a federal hate crime law. Ironically, years later, my friends at the ACLU, when I was Attorney General, about 6 years later, challenged the constitutionality of the law that I had written. And all of a sudden, I was in the unique position as the lawyer for the state of Ohio to actually go into court and defend the law that I had written 6 years earlier. And I'm happy to say it's a happy story. It went all the way, not just to the Ohio Supreme Court, it went to the US Supreme Court, where the US Supreme Court ruled that this was not a violation of the First Amendment, that it was not punishing free speech, it was punishing actions motivated by hate, and that it was consistent with the US Constitution. That also made me feel like somehow serving as a state senator and serving as an attorney general actually meant something, as opposed to just writing a press release. When every student is admitted to our law school, Cleveland Marshall Law School at Cleveland State, would they get a book? They get To Kill a Mockingbird, the story of perhaps the greatest lawyer who ever lived, Atticus Finch, who defended a wrongly accused Black man of rape. It's not a pleasant story. It's a hard book to read, and most of us read it in high school, some in college. When the students open up the book, they see their name in it, the date they were admitted to our law school, and then a blank date for the day they graduate and a blank day for the day that they'll take the bar exam. I send that to them because I want them, again, to see the end in mind. I want them to see that this isn't just about earning a living or getting a law degree. It's about making a difference.
the entire world. The Supreme Court, a decision on marriage equality.
Lawyers descending on airports.
One injustice one place is an injustice in every place.
Long before the Cleveland Indians changed their name, if you visited our law school, you'd see outside the dean's office the pictures of the guardians of traffic. And that means a lot to us. Why? Because I tell each of our students on orientation day, and all the time they're here, that they're not just law students. They are future guardians of justice. They are future custodians of democracy. Have a sense of urgency and have a sense of purpose. My third story and third lesson is that every person counts. And I'll share just two quick stories about what I mean by that. This is me when I peaked at being good looking. I was in 6th grade at Fernway Elementary School in Shaker Heights. I wanted to be the president of Fernway Elementary School. And so I embarked on my very first campaign for office. I remember going to my parents and saying, I want to be president because then I will get to lead the school in the Pledge of Allegiance. And by the way, that was the only responsibility, I believe, of the president of Fernway Elementary School. But then something got in my way. One of my classmates, Billy Riley, announced for president of Fernway Elementary School as well. Now, for those of you who didn't go to Fernway, you don't know who Billy was, but let me tell you, he was the Fonz. He was the best looking kid in the 6th grade. He was the smartest kid in the 6th grade. He was the best athlete in the 6th grade. Every mother wanted their daughter to marry Billy Riley someday. And I'm running against Billy Riley, and look at the size of my forehead even then. I was sort of a nerd. I said to my parents, I'm running, and they said, honey, we want to help you in any way we can. By the way, who's running against you? And I said, Billy Riley. And they said, honey, this is not a good idea. Even my parents had no faith in me. But here's how I won. Now, first, I want to show you a picture of Billy Riley. Okay, that's not really Billy Riley, I admit. That's Justin Bieber. But my point is, this is sort of like how Billy Riley looked. I couldn't find a picture of Billy Riley. So this is the closest I could come. I'm running against Justin Bieber. I'm running against the Fonz. But I won, and I won in a landslide, and here's why. Billy thought he was going to win because he was Billy. I knew my only chance of winning was to go to every single student in the 6th grade and ask them to help me. Did I beg? Yes, I did. But the bottom line is this: I won in a landslide because I asked and he didn't. And it's taught me a lesson my entire life that the phone isn't going to ring and people aren't going to give you something. You have to go out and ask for it. You have to go out and earn it. And it's really been the lesson my entire life, which is why I've made thousands of phone calls to raise money and met thousands and thousands of voters. Little did I know that when I would run for Attorney General in 1990, that I would set a record that has never been broken. I won the race for Attorney General in 1990 in the closest margin in Ohio political history of any statewide race. It's the only statewide race in history that automatically triggered a recount. It was so close. My margin of victory, for those of you who play trivia and want to know the answer someday, what was Lee Fisher's margin of victory in 1940? Well, here's the answer. Out of 3.5 million votes, it was 1,234 votes, 1234. And those words have kept in my mind. Why? Because I realized I could go anywhere in the state of Ohio. I could look somebody straight in the eye and know that there was a good chance that person did not vote for me. That is a humbling experience. This is one of many cartoons because there was a recount. And honestly, that recount lasted for weeks and weeks and months, long before we had close elections that we know about today, like Bush versus Gore, or Trump versus Clinton, or Trump versus Biden. I knew what a hanging Chad was back in 1990. And I can tell you that that experience made me realize that not just every voter counts, that every person counts. And when I served as the president and CEO of the Center for Families and Children, I made it my business to make sure that we talked to every single one of our clients, particularly those for whom we provided mental health services, and that we did three things. We gave them hope, we gave them dignity, and we gave them purpose. So I actually believe that one of the most important things you can do is, no matter where you go, whether it's the person serving you food, whether it's the person cleaning your floors in your building, they count just as much as the CEO or the president or anyone else. My fourth story and my fourth lesson comes from Stephen Covey. He wrote a book which I think may be still the best book on leadership I've ever read. It's called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of those 7 habits goes like this: seek first to understand, and then to be understood. I believe that most wars, most divorces, most breakups occur for one reason. One person isn't listening to the other. They're talking past them, or they're talking over them. There is nothing more important than being able to get inside of the head of the person you're talking to and actually try to listen. And that is not what's happening in the United States of America today. We've never been more divided. We talk past each other. We yell at each other. We don't listen to each other. We put our heads in the sand. And what we do, as they said in To Kill a Mockingbird, is that we actually end up generally seeing what we look for and hearing what we listen for. It's why those of you who are conservative are watching Fox News, and those of you who are liberal or moderate are watching NBC and CNN, because we like the comfort of hearing views that we actually agree with. That's not so healthy, though. It's why I tell our students, take moot court. Take a position in moot court in law school that you actually disagree with. Learn the other side. Argue the other side. Better understand how the other person thinks and listens. And so as a result, I've tried to have teachable moments in my life, and I'll give you just one quick story. Peggy and I have had a 40-year dinner experiment. Let me explain. It always has bothered Peggy and I that we would go out to dinner with a couple that we really liked a lot. And at the end of the evening, we'd come home and we'd say, what did we learn about that couple? And actually, we learned a lot. And then we thought to ourselves, what do they know about us? I can't tell you how many dinners we've had, and hopefully none of those couples are on this call today. I can't tell you how many dinners we've had with couples who at the end of the evening, they didn't even know we had children, no less the names of our children. They didn't even know whether we lived in a house or an apartment. Why? They didn't ask us a single question in a 2.5-hour dinner. We, on the other hand, asked them hundreds of questions. We knew the names of their children. We knew where they vacation. And we weren't just asking the questions because we were trying to win our 40-year experiment game. We actually were genuinely interested. But think about this. The next time you go out with a couple, hopefully at the end of that evening, they will know as much about you as you know about them. And if not, then I would suggest that at least one of the couples aren't doing a very good job of seeking to understand before being understood. But most of us spend most of our time trying to make the argument, trying to be the preacher or the prosecutor or the politician to win over the audience, as opposed to just taking a couple steps back and listening and asking good questions and learning about the other person. I remember the first bill that I ever introduced back in the early 1980s as a state legislator. Now, you would think it was motherhood and apple pie. It's now today known as Ohio's Child Safety Seat Restraint Law, that requires children under the age of 4 who weigh less than 40 pounds to be in a child seat restraint. And I wrote that law in the early 80s. Now, you would think everybody voted for that, right? No. It turned out to be one of the most controversial bills in the legislative session that year. Why? Because, especially in Southern Ohio, they viewed this like the mandatory seatbelt law or a mandatory motorcycle helmet law. You're not going to tell me how to raise my children. You're not going to tell me they have to be in a child seat. You're not going to tell me I have to wear a seatbelt. You're not going to tell me today that I have to take a vaccine. My point being that even then, and it actually goes further back than that, even issues that some of us or many of us would think were obvious were difficult. So all of a sudden, I introduced this bill and I didn't think I could get it passed. I was shocked. So what did I do? I said there was only one thing to do. I went to every legislator, Republican and Democrat, primarily in the rural areas of Southern Ohio, and I met with every one of them. Some cases I brought with me pediatricians who explained that literally being in a car accident at just 30 miles an hour was like a child falling off a 5-story building, explaining that this was actually going to save lives and that children were being killed needlessly because they weren't in a child safety seat restraint law. In other words, I got them to listen to the other side and to change their mind. And almost to a person they did, and eventually 2 years later, the bill passed almost unanimously in the House and the Senate. But it's not just always about changing other people's minds. Sometimes it's about changing your own mind. When I ran for Attorney General, I was in favor of the death penalty. Why? Because I was also the author of Ohio's Missing Children Law. And I felt that there were some crimes that were so brutal, so hateful, so heinous, like, for example, killing a child, that I thought the only appropriate penalty was death. And so I was an ardent proponent of the death penalty. Years later, some people came to me and said, Lee, we'd like to show you the other side. We'd like to show you the number of people who are wrongfully incarcerated and through DNA and evidence would have gone to the gas chamber or had lethal injection, but it turned out they were innocent. They didn't commit the crime. They showed me stories about how they had inadequate or incompetent counsel and didn't get a fair trial. I changed my mind. I chose the discomfort of doubt over the comfort of conviction and realized that there are times you need to look at the other side yourself and change your mind. And so just a few years ago, former Governor Bob Taft and former Attorney General Jim Petro and I, 2 Republicans and a Democrat, all of whom at one time supported the death penalty, wrote an op-ed in newspapers around the state saying we had changed our minds. I think it's important to know what you don't know. And even though it's important to have firm values, I don't think it's important to have firm beliefs, meaning that values should always stay strong and still, and you never cross those lines. But when you get new information, yes, you can modify your beliefs, and there's nothing wrong with changing your mind. And so I'm dealing with a controversy as we speak. Some of you may have heard about it. We are known as Cleveland Marshall College of Law. We're named after the 4th Chief Justice of the United States, arguably the greatest Chief Justice in our history, the longest serving Chief Justice. Most of the early cases that our students learn in constitutional law were written by John Marshall. But not just a couple of years ago, a book was written that revealed that he was a slave owner. And he wasn't just any ordinary slave owner. He bought and sold over 200 slaves in his life and never, unlike George Washington, for example, never freed those slaves. So now what do? We were faced with a petition from students and alumni throughout the nation saying it was time to change the name of our law school. I had students come to me and said, this is an easy choice for you, Dean Fisher. You should immediately go to the university and say, change the name. Because by the way, the university has to make the decision, not the law school. I had some alumni who came to me and said, Lee, this is actually a very easy decision. This is cancel culture. This is political correctness at its worst, and you should shut that petition down. Well, I didn't listen to either one. As a result, I have alumni who are mad at me to this day because I formed a committee to look at both sides of the issue. I have students who are mad at me to this day because I formed a committee to look at both sides of the issue. We add 6 public forums where we listen to what other law schools and universities have done that faced with similar petitions. We came in and had a forum with somebody who's an expert on John Marshall's legacy and somebody who was an expert on the fact that he owned 200 slaves. We then did a poll and a survey of 4,000 of our alumni. We actually wrote a 45-page paper about the pros and the cons of changing our name. Now, I personally believe we should change our name because I believe we should be guided by our current day values and not the values of the time. But I also believe that there are legitimate arguments on both sides and that it's important that we listen before we jump to conclusions. So yes, I hope the university changes the name, but I'm proud of the fact that I didn't listen to those students who felt this was a slam dunk. And I'm proud of the fact that I didn't listen to those alumni who felt this was a slam dunk on the other side, because nothing is quite as clear as it seems in the moment. Now, that's why I say it's important to know what you don't know. I want to end my talk today with my 5th and final lesson and my 5th and final story. And that is, you are not your failure. This is a picture of students taking what arguably is one of the most difficult tests known to woman and mankind today. It's called the bar exam. And let me tell you, literally as we speak, right now in Wilmington, Ohio, our students are taking the Ohio bar exam. They were honestly probably the 3 most stressful days of my life. There was no final exam I ever took in law school that even compared to the bar exam. And even when we do well, at least 10% of the students of our law school don't pass the bar exam, even in years when we do well, because that means we're getting about a 90% pass rate. So think about that. Now think about the fact you've spent now 3 years, or if you're going evenings, 4 years of your life in law school. You're taking the bar exam and you fail. Historically, deans have always sent out letters to those who passed and congratulate them, but didn't communicate with those who failed. And I said, I'm going to spend most of my time with those who failed. And so as a result, I send a message every year, and I will again probably in a few months when we find out the results of this bar exam. And basically, here's what I say to them. I say, I don't pretend to know or understand what you're going through, but I want to share some thoughts on my own experience. Because although I had the great privilege of serving in state office for 18 years, I also had my share of setbacks along the way. From president of Fernway Elementary School through to my first 14 years of public office, I never lost an election. In fact, I never really failed at anything. But all that changed in 1994, when I barely lost my reelection for Ohio Attorney General. I was stunned. And for a while, I not only experienced loss, I felt lost. I barely lost my governor's race 4 years later. I was hurt. And in 2010, I lost my race for the United States Senate. I was disappointed. Each time I lost, over 11 million people knew I had been kicked out of my job and I had failed to pass my election exam. But each defeat led me to a new, unanticipated, exciting opportunity. And my last defeat put me on a path that led me to where I am today, arguably the best job I've ever had among many fulfilling jobs. Each time I lost, I reached out to family and friends who were willing to share, not just in my joy, but in my pain. But something happened on that night that I lost, when I was giving my concession speech, that changed my life. You see, just 6 months into being Attorney General, Peggy and I had our second child, Jessica. And that night, on election night, Peggy and Jessica are on the stage, as you see right here. And Jessica, although you may not be able to tell from this picture, is not just crying, she's sobbing. Because she sees everybody else sad, and she knows somehow Daddy has lost the election. But it's what Jessica said to us that night that actually changed how I look at defeat. She said, "Does this mean you won't be my daddy anymore?" She actually thought that my losing the election as Attorney General meant that I also was not going to be her father. And her words helped me understand that my job did not define who I was. I was still a father. I was still a husband. I was still somebody who could get up every morning and be thankful that I was alive. And her words helped me understand that each time I lost, I was about to fail up, not down. And because I refused to allow my defeat to define me. So I say to our students who fail the bar exam, don't let this define you. You were not given this opportunity, you earned it. You met our high standards for admission. You met our high standards for graduation. You're a proud graduate of a law school, and you will succeed because you pursued your dream by living a few years of your life, like most people won't. So you could spend the rest of your life like most people can. And then I close by telling them that some friends are like your shadow. They're only with you when the sun is shining. Your true friends are the ones when you're down, and they're always with you. And I remind them that we are your law school for life. So I want to end tonight with a serenity prayer for tonight. I mean today, although I'm speaking so long, maybe it is tonight. I want to end with my serenity prayer for leadership. And it goes like this. God, grant me the serenity to remember my why and to not let what I know today limit what I can see tomorrow. Living with a sense of urgency and purpose, remembering that every person counts and that every person matters. The courage to seek first to understand before I try to be understood. And the wisdom to not allow my setbacks and failures define who I am. Only I define who I am and where I'm going. Thank you.
Lee, thank you so much for such inspiring and meaningful leadership lessons from your experiences. We have time for a quick question. So as you think about the career you've had and what you're doing now and start to look ahead, what's on the horizon for you?
You know, I'm loving my job because my mission and the mission of our law school is to educate and train the next generation of lawyer leaders. What could be better than that? So my plan is to do this as long as I think I'm doing a good job and that I have a great team around me. And so I'm fulfilled every day. I feel like I have a purpose. I begin each day with the end in mind, and that is that we're educating, training guardians of justice and custodians of democracy. And given what's happening today, those people who are lying about a false election, those people who are defending men and women who attacked the Capitol and injured, in some cases actually resulted in the death of police officers, that doesn't just trouble me, that angers me. And I actually believe that my job as a result as dean has never been more important, but it's also as a result never been more fulfilling.
Well, Lee, we thank you for all of your words of wisdom today and for joining us. And we look forward to all of the continued impact you will have on our community. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Mary Ann.
Thanks, Rachel. Lee, that was truly inspirational. As you know, these sessions are usually 30 minutes. This one was scheduled to be 45, and the time literally flew by. You're just, your lessons learned and through the narrative of your experiences is really powerful. Thank you so very much. We're grateful to have you at Cleveland State.